Welcome back to the Extra Medium channel. Today I'm going to walk you through how I've started to build next year's race bike. In a previous episode I showed how I modified this swing arm to fit into an Aprilia RS 125 frame. And in another previous episode I showed how to modify a top yoke and bottom yoke to fit any frame. This one's from a GSX-R. And with everything lined up, now I can start to mount the motor into the frame. Since the Aprilia frame already has some bottom motor mounts, I'm going to utilize those since I know that they're square to the frame and that they're mounted solid with good welds. I need to measure the distance so I understand if there will be any interference with the swing arm. I'm going to focus on the back mount of this motor. That way I can ensure that the cog on the motor is lined up with the sprocket on the swing arm. This is really important. It's probably the most important part. So I'm going to get this squared away and then I'll work my way forward. In addition to being lined up side to side with the sprockets, I also need to make sure that the middle of the sprocket on the motor is in line with the pivot bolt on the swing arm. This will ensure that as the swing arm moves up and down, I don't have the chain rubbing on the top or the bottom more so than the other. So now that I have 3 holes, one to mount to the frame in the middle, one at the bottom to be a linkage mount for my rear linkage, and one at the top to mount onto the motor, I can go ahead and draw the shapes and understand what these 3 holes in relation to each other should look like. Now that I have that done, I'm going to extend this bracket further back and also weld it onto the same cross member. This will give it more support and make sure that it's as rigid as possible. So in order to do that, I'm going to measure this separately and then transfer my 3-hole template over to this one. So what I'm doing here is just making sure that this bracket will not interfere with the swing arm moving up and down if it's welded directly onto the cross member. So I'm just finding my clearances and I'll find the relationship between that and the middle hole, and there we go. So I can just line up the middle hole and I'll swivel the top hole so that it doesn't hit the swing arm, and that's what I got. So I did this in 2 steps. I could have done it in 1, but I felt better doing it in 2. It just felt better to me to do it this way. And using the proper reference holes, I know it's going to line up properly. So all good. So I've drawn both brackets on here and I'll cut them out. But before I do that, I'm going to drill my holes. Now, I'm not going to drill holes on both of them when they're separated like this. I'm going to drill them on one and then cut them both out, line them up as they relate to the mounting surface on the cross member and the middle hole. The middle hole is the one that's my reference for everything. Now with the engine mounted in place, I'm free to make sure that side to side it's spaced properly. So while it pivots on the middle bolt, it can move from side to side. So I'll check alignment on the sprockets and make sure that's all good, and then I'll fabricate spacers to keep it in place. Now remember, anything can be a spacer as long as the bolt fits through it and it has enough surface area to keep the outside things away from each other, it's good to go. Old handlebars are a really good thing to use. Aluminum handlebars are easy to cut and easy to slip on, and they're light. All right, here we go with my TIG welding again. I just need this to be on there a little bit, but turns out my welds are spectacular. Check them out. Moving on to the front mounts. So on the top rear head mounts, one side I'm going to make aluminum, just like I did the bottom, and the other side steel. On this side with the aluminum, it will be a little bit tricky because I need to line it up with where it needs to be. Then I need to fabricate the right side, which is just steel bars. Then I'll need to make a spacer with 2 female sides, so threaded on both sides. So that's a little bit different. So I'll show you how I made the spacer with a nut on one side and then a smaller nut on the other. The main thing I'm trying to do on the left side is to avoid where the carburetor will go. And I need to keep in mind the long game. I need to be able to remove this and remove the carburetor and make sure that nothing's in the way. I can't have a bolt that's too long that goes all the way through that won't fit out of the hole once it's in. So a lot of forward thinking, a little bit of strategy here, just making sure that it's all serviceable in the future. So here it is, final setup. I'm pretty stoked to have this all finished. I love having the motor in place and solidly mounted. Now I can move on to fun things like making an exhaust and the rear suspension. That'll be a good one. So tune in for that next time as we do the linkage and the top mount for the rear shock. Thanks for watching Extra Medium. If you watched this far, please subscribe. I just need a few more.